Hey everybody, it's Retro DM Ray back with you for another installment of the role-playing game primer and old school playbook. Today we are continuing along in our exploits of the level 2 key of the Stalking the Dungeon section on page 38. We just finished with room number 3 regarding the poison gas trap. If you have the map from the last video, you can find it on that video and screenshot it or whatever you need to do so you can have that map so you can follow along. We are now moving to room number 4, the secret room. So he says, at this point, I discover I've changed my mind. This room is supposed to contain a monster encounter, and I have another monster with treasure in room 6. Instead of doing that, I'm going to place a monster with treasure in this room. The Cobalts, clever little monsters that they are, have trapped a giant spider in this room to guard their treasure. I already have a giant crab spider in the encounter key, but there's no reason not to have another one here. Stats for giant crab spider are armor class 13, hit dice 2, number of attacks 1, which is a bite, damage 1d8 plus poison, movement rate of 40 foot, saves as a second level fighter, and morale is 7. Hit points are 14. The treasure must be something the Cobalts picked up along the way, since a small scouting group wouldn't be carrying a lair treasure. Let's assume they found an unguarded treasure. In fact, maybe they found it in this very room and chose not to move it. Or perhaps they trapped the giant spider in the room for their own safety. I may even decide something different when I run this adventure. Unguarded treasures are described on page 131 of the Basic Fantasy RPG Core Rules 3rd edition. Let's go through the rolls. A level 1 unguarded treasure has a 75% chance of including copper pieces. I roll a 51, so there are 1d8 times 100 copper pieces. I roll an 8, so the total is 800 coppers. There's also a 50% chance of silver pieces being present. I roll a 16, so there are 1d6 times 100 of them here. Rolling 1d6, I discover there are 400 silver pieces in this treasure hoard. There's a 25% chance of electrum pieces. I roll 70, so there's no electrum in this hoard. Gold pieces are only 7% likely, and platinum is a scant 1%, and I roll 60 and 15 respectively, so there's no gold or platinum in this hoard. Gems are 7% likely, jewelry 3%, and rolls of 81 and 22 mean that there's none of that either. Finally, there's a 2% chance of a magic item. I roll 02, so there is a single magic item in this hoard. Turning the page, I roll on the any column of the first table. My roll is 97, which indicates a miscellaneous magic item. Rolling one more time on the table on page 134, I get a 29. The magic item indicated is a brazier commanding fire elementals. Okay, wow, that's actually a very powerful magical item, probably far too powerful for first level characters. If I was dealing with a group of experienced players, I might just go ahead and use that item just to see what they do. But this is an adventure for beginners. No, I'm not doing that. I roll again, getting 16 this time. The magic item in this hoard is a pair of boots of levitation. An interesting item, and not one that I'm afraid will cause any sort of balance issues. I could have skipped any or all of the above rolls and just put whatever I want into this dungeon. However, random rolls make things easier for me and help me avoid developing any sort of pattern that my players might notice. I'll talk more about that in Part 5, Game Mastery. So we have 800 copper pieces, 400 silver pieces, and a pair of boots of levitation. Remember what I said earlier about using percentile dice to randomize the number of coins in a hoard. I rolled 2 numbers, getting 21 and 100. I deduct 100 from the copper coins, then add 21, getting 721 copper pieces. Since I rolled 100 for the silver pieces, there are, in fact, 400 silver pieces even in this hoard. Let's have a little fun with this. In the middle of the floor of this room, you see a pair of boots, surrounded by a pile of copper coins. The boots appear to be filled to the tops with silver coins. Treasure, 721 coppers, 400 silvers, boots of levitation. Yeah, I said I wasn't writing boxed text, but I want to be sure to remember this bit. The giant spider is hanging from the ceiling and should get an extra chance to surprise the player characters. Maybe 1 through 3 on a d6, instead of the standard chance of 1 to 2 on a d6, as given on page 43 of the 3rd edition core rules. The rules there say I could give 1 and 4 on a d6, but the monster isn't exactly hidden, so I'm splitting the difference. And let me stop there for a second and remind you, if you don't already know this from the core rules, of the 3rd edition of Basic Fantasy, elves reduce that chance by 1. And if you allow any other supplemental classes or races, they might do that as well. Let's go on to room number 5. I'm making this area much like room 6 on the first level. The tunnel leading off the map to the west runs another 120 feet to a cave opening in the side of a bluff. The cave mouth is well hidden from the outside by brush and vines, but many creatures use it to enter this dungeon. Roll 1d6 when this area is entered. On a 1, one of the wandering monster groups is entering this room from the tunnel. Room number 6, Cobalts. This area is pretty easy. I'm just going to place a group of kobolds here, with a leader who's a bit tougher than the run-of-the-mill kobolds. Kobolds appear in pretty large groups, 4d4 individuals, according to the entry on page 99 of the 3rd edition core rules. Rolling, I get 12 total. The rules say that 1 in every 6 individuals be a leader type, so 2 of these are leaders. I was thinking 1, but let's go with it. First, the 10 ordinary kobolds. AC 13, hit dice 1/2, number of attacks 1, dagger, damage 1d4, move 20 foot, saves as a normal man, morale is 7. Now, before I roll up hit points, let's talk about a few things here. The core rules say that kobolds have 1d4 hit points, but I've written 1/2 next to their hit dice. This is a common way to mark such creatures. There are a handful of them. The rules say 1 weapon for number of attacks and give 1d4 for damage. So I'm going to say they are armed with daggers. Finally, the rules say that kobolds, led by a leader type, get +1 to their morale, so I've indicated that above with the original morale in parentheses. So the original morale was 6, but as a leader type, because they have a leader type, at least 1 in their group, it becomes a morale 7. Now let's have some hit points. Distributed hit points are 2, 4, 2, 3, 4, 4, 1, 4, 3, and 3. Now for the leader types. The rules say they have a full hit die, but are apparently the same otherwise as the regular kobolds. I'm going to assume they're at least a bit stronger and arm themselves with short swords. Morale must be 7, since it would be weird for the leaders to be more cowardly than their followers. 2 kobold leaders, AC 13, hit dice 1, number of attacks 1, short sword, damage 1d6, move 20, saves as a normal man, morale 7, hit points 5 and 7. And that completes the dungeon. Or does it? One thing I haven't done is to define a wandering monsters table for this level. Since I've decided that both levels of this dungeon are going to be dungeon level 1, I could just choose to use the same wandering monster table as was given for level 1. But that's not very many monsters. The table may run out before the adventurers finish exploring. Here's my compromise. I'm going to add 2 encounters to the table from level 1. Now when the adventurers are on either level and an encounter is rolled, I'll use my expanded list. Let's start with some kobolds who may have wandered away from the main group. 5. 1d6 plus 1 kobolds. 8 total. Again, AC 13, hit dice 1/2, number of attacks 1 with a dagger, damage 1d4, move 20, save normal man, morale 6. Hit points are 2, 4, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, and 2. Finally, we'll add something that might have wandered in from outside. Looking at the sample wandering monster tables in the 3rd edition core rules, I noticed that giant bees are an option. Let's throw some of them into our list. Number 6, 1d6 giant bees. 8 total. AC 13, hit dice 1/2. Number of attacks 1, sting, damage 1d4 plus poison. Move 10 foot, fly 50 foot. Saves, fighter level 1, morale 9. Hit points 2, 2, 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, and 4. Now this adventure is well and truly done, and it's time to call my players together and get something started. Hopefully this has inspired you to do the same. Now we're moving on to the next section. This is part 5, Game Mastery. The goal of this book is to make it easier to get into a role-playing game, and I believe the best way to do that is to help more people become good game masters. Sorry about that noise. In this section, I'm going to give you some advice on how to do just that, but before I do that, I need to finally explain what old school means. Yeah, it's about time. The most important thing about the old school is this: Rule 0. The Game Master is always right. That's how it's usually said, though there are some variations. What it means is that the game you're playing is totally under the control of the Game Master. Whatever he or she says happens. Well, that's what happens, even if it disagrees with the rules, and the Game Master can change the rules at any time. Wow, that sounds incredibly bad, you might be thinking. Who would want that? Remember, the Game Master's job isn't to kill your characters, or quote-unquote win somehow by beating up on you, but to make the game fun for everyone. So a good Game Master won't lord it over you, showing off his or her imaginative quote-unquote power at every turn, changing the rules like some mad god in some dark mythology. Well, bad GMs might do some or all of that, a fact I think might explain the rise of the new school. In the new school, the rules are of primary importance, and the Game Master's job is to execute the quote-unquote program they define, based on the input from the players, as if the GM were simply a computer. The rules specifically include things that the GM should not do, such as pitting the player characters against opponents with whom they aren't well matched. This sounds better to a lot of people, and if you're one of those people, hey, go for it. There are lots of new school games available, and much of what you learn in this book will help you play those games too. But he says, I'm an unabashed believer in the old school. I would agree. And I'm going to do my best to help you understand why. One of the consequences of the new school is that modern games are much more detailed, having a rule for everything. Old school games depend in large part on the rulings by the Game Master. Who is in the range of that fireball? What do I have to roll to jump across that pit? The GM in an old school game considers the situation and makes a ruling, while the new school Game Master picks up the rulebook and looks for the appropriate rule. This usually means the rulebook must be consulted more often, since with more detailed rules, it's much harder to remember them all. The main advantage of the new school is this: it's harder to be a truly bad Game Master. Without the ability to freely make any ruling you want, an ability often called GM Fiat, it's harder to screw up the game. On the other hand, though, I believe a really good GM, one who knows how to make the game fun, is seriously hampered by the new school restrictions. I personally think that being a new school GM is less fun. In most new school games, the high level of detail in the rules means it takes much longer to create characters or monsters. I would also argue that it takes much longer to have an encounter or really do anything, but that's just my experiences with Pathfinder for over a year and a half now, and 5th edition for several years before that. Anyway, moving on. A GM creating an adventure must build many opponents, only to see most of them killed off in the adventure. The GM will then need to put the same work in for the next adventure, while the players add an ability or two to their character sheets and move on. As long as you use published adventures, of course, you don't need to put out that effort, but then you never get the fun of creating your own. You've already seen how easy it is to create adventures for basic fantasy RPG. Other old school games are very similar. In fact, it's not hard to translate materials between OSR, old school Renaissance, game systems, a subject I'll get into in a bit later in the book. The advice I'll be presenting below is directed at new game masters of old school games. It may be that some of it will be relevant to new school GMs as well. Alright, so let's start with a little bit of terminology. An adventure is a single dungeon or wilderness area or any other coherent set of opponents and or challenges. An adventure may take one or more sessions to get through, depending, of course, on how long you and your friends choose to play each time you get together. Several related adventures may be called a campaign, but that word also refers to a series of adventures run by a single group, even if the adventures aren't necessarily related. Sometimes a series of related adventures is called an adventure series, which is a lot less ambiguous. Finally, a fictional world in which one or more groups of adventurers play out various adventures is called a campaign world. So, for example, the basic fantasy multi-module BF1 Morgan's Fort presents a campaign world called the Western Lands and an adventure series set in that world. The 3 adventures, the Old Island Fortress, the Nameless Dungeon, and Cave of the Unknown, are related geographically. All 3 are described as being relatively near the home base area called Morgan's Fort. So keep it simple. As a beginning GM, you won't yet have a sense of how things are supposed to work. Whatever game you choose to run, keep your early games simple. Don't let your players beg or wheedle you into allowing every rule supplement that sounds fun to them. Don't succumb to the urge to modify a bunch of stuff. Trust me on this. The vanilla game can keep you and your players entertained for quite a while. Don't build railroads. One of the many things that we try to avoid in old school is writing a story. It's an easy trap to fall into. You envision a grand villain, and you see in your head the story of how the player characters defeat them. You might not even know what player characters will be playing in an adventure, but it doesn't matter to you. It's a great story, and you're sure your players are going to enjoy it. It's the model used in most single-player computer RPGs, so it'll be familiar to many people these days. You go through this scene, get a clue or a key or something that leads you into the next scene, and again something leads you onward to another scene. Eventually you get to the villain. Typically, just as he or she or it or they are about to enact some horrible plan. We often call this a railroad, and building one is rarely a good idea. What if, after playing out the first scene, the player characters completely overlook the clue? Now, to keep the adventure on track, you have to basically hand it to them. So you send in an NPC to say, wait a minute, guys, you missed this. Or what if, having found the clue, they totally misinterpret it? The strange hammer they found was supposed to lead them to the Rovan mines, but they thought it was a shipbuilder's tool and headed for the coast. So again, you send in an NPC to redirect them because they got derailed. See why we call it a railroad? Or what if, having figured out who the villain is, they decide to join forces with him? Or maybe they just decide to ignore him. So much for being heroes. Is it even possible to get this story back on the rails? And then there's that thing that happens sometimes. You have a whole trail of clues that will lead step by step to the discovery of the bad guy's plans or his weakness or whatever. And after getting just one clue, one of your players figures out the whole thing, and the party skips all the other clues and scenes you have set in place and goes straight to the bad guy and vanquishes them. All that work you put in creating the adventure goes poof. It's especially important not to abuse the power of the GM fiat to force the adventure back on track. Your players probably aren't stupid, and they'll resent being pushed or hurted. The important thing is, don't write a story. In the old school, story is what happens when our players pick up their dice and walk into our worlds. Go ahead and create NPCs with grand plans, but try very hard not to have any grand plans of your own in the process. It's way more fun for you if the NPC's plans are spoiled than if yours are. So I'm going to stop here for today, but I do want to mention something. First of all, there are a bunch of ways that you can help out this channel. As you know, like, subscribe, please share. It's always G-rated, always will be. It's apolitical, it's acultural, it's a current events. We're not going to go and do any of those things or touch any of those things. Don't put those things in the comments because I'll delete them. This is just good old talking about old school gaming. But speaking of old school gaming, a while back, I let you know that I've got a new thing that's happening. I am on Patreon. The link is going to be down below for my Patreon. Go check that out. Consider joining that for just a small monthly support, and you will get to join in on what I'm going to be hoping is going to be a cool West Marches style hex crawl play-by-post campaign. It's going to be taking place in a particular setting that is there and available for you to see on the Patreon when you become a patron. And I'll be adding other things on there for patrons as well. Some of the quick start character creation and rules information that you'll need. Some little tidbits here and there of some adjustments that I have for you that are going to be some kind of cool surprises, I hope. And some guidelines for you that you'll need. I'm encouraged by Tom from Solo Dungeon Crawler. He has got a great channel. Please check his out and listen to his solo adventures. He's got some great stuff going on for Phandalin. He's got some great stuff going on for his Mystara. It's just really awesome. He does great voices and sounds, and he's just a cool YouTube creator. So please go check out his channel. solodungeoncrawler.blogspot.com is also a place where you can find him there and go back to his channel from there. So a big shout out to Tom. he asked about the campaign in particular today, and so I wanted to again share with you, if you really want to join that and really have some cool, awesome adventures in that West Marches style game, I'd really love to do that with you. So please consider signing up and signing on to do that. Be glad to do that with you. I think that'd be really cool. Also, check out other things in the link below for my Drive-Thru RPG affiliate link if you're going to pick up some stuff, or you might want to pick up something and have me review it for the channel. Got some other things maybe coming down the pipeline for the channel too. We'll see how that's going to work out. I'm hoping that in the next few weeks I'll be able to put together that video for you that will connect the dots of all those things that I put in that short, and make it all make sense for you as to what I'm going to use all of that for. And also in there, you can support me and my family on PayPal, as well as find me on Facebook. My link is in there as well. So thanks again for tuning in. Like I say at the end of all my videos, may all your rolls be nat 20s. I hope you guys really enjoy your games, and take care.